Hello, I'm Congressman Jonathan Jackson, representing Illinois' 1st Congressional District. Today is January 6, 2026, and I've had the privilege of being with my friend and a friend of all humanity, Dr. James Count Early. Dr. Early, great to see you today.
It is good to be with you, Congressman.
So the world has had a shake, if you will. It has had a quake. What we saw this past weekend unfold is the invasion of a sovereign nation, although there's been some disputes. And now this former president or current president has just appeared in New York City as a criminal defendant. President Donald J. Trump is using the language of treating this president as a criminal defendant. Yesterday, Mr. President Maduro described himself as a prisoner of war. Could you comment on that for us, please? Is he a defendant or is he a prisoner of war?
I think objectively, President Maduro is a prisoner of war. I happen to know him personally. I know his wife, Celia Flores. I spent many occasions in discussion with him about policy issues, particularly around Afro-descendants in Venezuela, of which there is a large concentration. This is a shocking development, an analog of which we are now experiencing with the use of the military extended into our own cities and breaking protocols. A real attack on the protocols and the legal parts of liberal democracy, which is being dismantled at home and around the world. We are seeing these brutal, vulgar, megalomaniac kind of invasions of national sovereignty. We saw a bombing in Nigeria just a few weeks ago, ostensibly to protect Christians in an area that is mostly concentrated in northern Nigeria of Muslims. But we've seen an analog of this before. We have to have a longer memory. It is very important for us to think about 2004, when another administration in the United States went in and took President Aristide and his wife out of Haiti against their will and simply dropped them off in Central Africa, where he remained in exile for a number of years in South Africa.
So let me ask you this. So why language matters, and you've worked at the Smithsonian Institute, and the weight of words is very significant. For President Maduro to say he's a prisoner of war, for the United States media to say he was captured, for other people to say that he was kidnapped, and for him to go before our United States court system as a criminal defendant. Could you please help me parse through some of those words, the gravity and the weight of what it means to have been kidnapped, starting with, versus it means to being captured?
Right. Well, as a student of Latin American and Caribbean history and also as a social activist, these words are very important. A prisoner of war is one in where the sovereignty of a nation has been violated against the protocols of the United Nations and against all of our constitutional protocols. That is a violation of law, and an invasion of a country and capturing its president, kidnapping its president, makes him then a prisoner of war. The United States is at war against Venezuela. It's been at war in a hybrid way against Venezuela for a very long time, since 2014 when President...
Let me put one point in there. So when you bring your military to another country, that's war.
When you invade another, this is what this was an invasion. We're hearing these metaphors like a kinetic operation. Well, that's just a metaphor for the use of official violence. We have the largest Marine Armada in many, many decades sitting right there off the coast of Venezuela, which, not so incidentally, that coastline Barlovento is significantly majority Afro-descendants who are on the front line of that. But
so, because we're going to go back, we've got so much to unpack. So if you see someone's ship, that's piracy.
That's piracy.
And that's an international term.
Yes, law.
It's law. Yeah. If you take someone's car at a gas station here, that may be carjacking and theft.
Yes.
So we have to make sure that people see the magnitude and the gravity of what is happening. And these are nations, this is a nation confronting another nation.
Exactly.
So when you don't have your police force can arrest someone. When your military goes in and extracts someone and takes a head of state, even with a disputed election, out of his bedroom with his wife, that's kidnapping and makes him de facto
Right.
a prisoner of war because your military took him out.
And again, the accumulated history of laws of how nations should mutually benefit in their interactions and how they should handle their differences, that has been violated in terms of the constitutional laws of the United States of America and certainly the international laws of the United Nations, the international courts. We have a rogue government that is violating internally inside the United States laws, abandoning any judicial complaints against them. And we see this in the international arena now of intervening and bombing without regard to any protocols, without regard to any consultation.
And so let me open that up. When we say bombing, that's also murder.
Yes. And so what the news reports, particularly the liberal media in the United States, has not reported is how many civilians were killed in this operation. We know that 32 Cuban security forces were killed, but how many civilians were killed? I called immediately into Venezuela to talk to a former member of the government and to talk to another tertiary member of the current government. And they said one of them lived right next to where the bombings took place. They have videos of people dead in cars, charred bodies, wounded people. But our media is celebrating on both sides of the aisle the capture of, quote unquote, this tyrant, this brutal dictator. And yes, there was a controversial election, but nevertheless, he has been recognized by the Latin American countries and countries around the world as the interlocutor for the people of Venezuela in international affairs.
And then let's put a little pin in that, and we're going to get back on point. I got to digress. When you talk about a disputed election and things that could have gone wrong, if that's our doctrine, if that's our philosophy on going forward, there are another 50 heads of governments around the world
in which that might be the case. But there is also, we have a more recent precedent here in the United States in which a contested election in which we had a treasonous move on this very building in which we set this very complex called the United States.
On this very day.
On this very day.
Where they tried to stop
yes.
the peaceful transfer
exactly.
of power.
So we
5 years ago on January 6th, where officers got killed.
So the seeds of the dismantling of the administrative state of liberal democracy in the United States, we're seeing those seeds blossom in very crude and brutal ways on the international arena, and Venezuela is just the latest. Now we have the President of the United States saying they will rule Venezuela. They have decided that they will represent what the people of Venezuela should be.
And who is they?
Well, they now is Marco Rubio, little Marco, who was demeaned.
That's our Secretary of State?
That's our Secretary of State.
I thought he was over the Secretary of State, the USAID. He's got 3 or 4 other titles.
He's got 3. Well, because we have concentrated power in the executive, which has really taken over collapsed the legislature of the United States, what Donald Trump says one day may change the next day, and what your job assignment is 1 hour may change in the next hour.
And so the other person in the group of they is
Hegseth.
Secretary Hegseth, that the Congress confirmed him and the Senate confirmed him to be the Secretary of Defense, that now he calls himself the Secretary
of War,
which is only can be granted by the United States Congress. We have to vote on that. And then the President of the United States, his first responsibility is to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Services, which he's also expanded his role and responsibilities to also become the Chief Executive or Chairman of the Board of the Donald J. and Kennedy Center. And I guess he's also doing programming over there. He's also Architect-in-Chief of the Trump Ballroom at the White House that has been stopped now because the architect has also quit. And so he's also running Venezuela?
He's running Venezuela, and now the 1823 Monroe Doctrine, which was set up to keep European powers from coming into the Americas, has now been renamed the Monroe Doctrine. And all of this fits what we understand to be the basic profiles historically of a dictator. So we are seeing a dictatorship of the executive body, which has collapsed the legislative body and which has severely hampered the judicial body and disregards all protocols, all rules. Might is right, acts first, and we'll debate it later. So yes, President Maduro is indeed a prisoner of war. And now we will see a dehumanizing show trial, which is to suggest that you could be next, as he had said to President Petro of Colombia, where the United States has...
Well, let's be very clear. He told President Petro of Colombia, watch your ass.
Yes. And of course, he's speaking to a former guerrilla fighter who is now head of state. And in a country where the United States has 9 military agreements where most of the cocaine comes, but we have not been able to stop cocaine from coming out of Colombia for generations across both Democratic and Republican administrations. So these are all fabricated lies, an attempt to divert us from the absence of governance, full health care here in the United States, raising of the minimum wage, protecting voting rights, and now being policemen of the world openly. So President Petro has been threatened in Colombia. President Sheinbaum in Mexico has been threatened. Greenland has been threatened.
What did he say about Sheinbaum?
Sheinbaum is a very progressive, social democratic kind of administrator, first woman president, remembering that Mexico was the first country in the hemisphere to nationalize its oil, I think back in the 30s. They have oil. They're being threatened now not to send oil to Cuba. She's a very progressive woman administrator who has a big job because the narco-traficantes do control a lot of Mexico. Mexico has been for decades the wild, wild frontier in the modern world. But the Trump administration is threatening all of that.
And we talk about the Mexico has been on the frontier. Two things that come to mind on that. First of all, there is one gun shop in Mexico, and it's owned by the Mexican government, and it specifically distributes guns to its military and its police force. So there's one gun shop in all of Mexico, over 120 million people, one gun shop.
Right.
On the United States-Mexico border, there are 3,500 gun shops. The drug lords, drug runners buy guns from American manufacturers and sell them in to Mexico. Do you want to comment on that?
The same situation with Haiti. This is the big lie, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, independents, that we've got to open our basic minds and ask ourselves, what is going on here? I remember first meeting President Lula now 25, 30 years ago in Brazil, and the first thing he said to me and Danny Glover is, you people, he was not speaking about you people, black people, have got to stop using all these drugs. We are the largest consuming drug market. Where are these drugs? What is going on in our society that our public policies are not addressing, such that we, in a capitalist kind of way, we become the consumer market for these drugs? So the United States is indicted in many, many ways, and we've got to ask both Democrats and Republican public servants who reflect the interests and the aspirations of their citizens, what is going on here? We have too many people on the Democratic part of the aisle who are celebrating that we just took over a dictator. Look at this surgical intervention, breaking all international laws that the U.S. military is going on. In South Florida, you can hardly tell the difference between a Republican and a Democrat when it comes to these international affairs, whether it's the genocide in Gaza or whether it's the invasion of Venezuela, or now the threats against Cuba. So we have to...
Let's put a pin in Cuba. So Cuba has had to find a way to survive, having been under economic boycott for the last 70 years. For having made a blow towards its freedom and independence. And as a consequence, in their survival, they now have the highest rate of literacy in our hemisphere and the longest life expectancy. And as a form of revenue, since they have no natural resources or oil, with their education, they've had to send doctors abroad to help build out medical systems throughout Africa, throughout Central and South America to generate revenue. And even in exchange for that, be it with Mexico or be it with Venezuela or other places, they will barter, and in exchange for their medical assistance and doctors, they will receive the natural resources of food as well as oil and other products. You want to comment?
I've been traveling to Cuba for 50 years. I was just most recently there in May, and Danny Glover and I were there in December. Danny Glover was the honorary ambassador for the first UN Decade of Afro-Descendants, and there was a large meeting of UNESCO and UN officials there. Cuba helped to liberate South Africa. I spent time with Fidel Castro.
South Africa,
yeah.
Angola,
Mozambique, that whole southern
Namibia,
African region.
When the United States was supporting
South
Africans and apartheid.
And even after Mandela was out of prison, he was still on the record as a terrorist. This is even under the Clinton administration.
So, you know, you got so much knowledge, and I got to pump the brake because I have to keep up with you. So when Mandela, that was part of a majority that was being oppressed, suppressed by the majority, by the minority white, that was being upheld, financed by U.S. corporations, finally ended up having that shackle broken. And President Mandela, the majority fighting for democracy, got the right to vote and became the president of the United States, became the president of South Africa,
That's right.
the Free Republic. When he came to visit all of European nations, the United States, and received the Nobel Peace Prize, he was still on the terrorist list for the United States Department.
He was still on the terrorist list when he visited the United States. And of course, you mentioned Cuba. We have to recall, what did he do immediately when he left the United States? He went to Cuba, and Fidel Castro tried to shake his hand. Mandela knocked his hand away and gave him a big embrace and said, "Without you, we would not be free."
Remember when he left New York City and Ted Koppel was interviewing him, I believe, at Columbia University, and they were saying this is a contradiction. Why are you still friends, or why are you friends with Cuba? And then he says, you can't tell me who my friends are.
Right.
They helped free me.
They helped free, and of course Fidel Castro said, we went down at the request to defeat apartheid. We didn't bring home one diamond, 1 ounce of uranium. We went there for humanity. We did not go there for reciprocal trade.
And
now,
you know, and Fidel Castro, I was in Angola, Luanda, when the Cuban troops were moving out during the time of their liberation and their presidential inauguration. And specifically, I remember President Castro asked only one thing of then President Jose Eduardo dos Santos. He asked that the one thing he asked for him is, let me bring all of my soldiers back home.
yes,
Even the ones that have been buried, just let me bring them home.
Right.
I don't want any of your resources,
Right.
your wealthy diamond, gold,
Right.
oil. I just want to bring my soldiers home that fought for you.
And now Cuban doctors, the socialized medicine, preventive medicine, who are exported around the world, are being called slaves by Marco Rubio, and they're pressuring governments around the world not to take in Cuban doctors. Why do these developed nations, including Italy and other places in Europe, why do they bring these doctors? Because Cuban doctors are trained from a social humanity point of view. The South African Medical Association was against bringing Cuban doctors in because the South African medical doctors wanted to be in Pretoria, Cape Town, and Johannesburg. The Cuban doctors will go into these villages, these small places, stay and live with the people. I spent time with Cuban doctors in the slums of Venezuela, where they're living right there in the community. I've been in hotels and came up with a fever when someone knocked on your door and said, I'm the doctor. Well, where did you come from? I live here in the hotel, because we are involved in preventing issues rather than simply reacting to issues. So we have a rogue government who is not only violating all of our constitutional laws and the laws of the UN, but basic ethical human principles of humanity, of calling these Cuban doctors. I was just in Cuba.
So Dr. Early, I got to steer this back because I got to get to Venezuela
Really?
because it was so big, and I need you back over and over again. And the reason we had to take our listeners and our viewers on this journey is to let them know this is spherical. This is a globe. It's interconnected, that you can't do one thing and it's not affecting other things. So we're looking at the hemisphere, what's going to happen with Colombia, Mexico, Cuba,
Brazil.
that's the Caribbean, Brazil, all the contiguous, the border states, And now let's focus in these last 10 minutes on what just happened in Colombia. We know that since August of this year that the United States has put CIA and other people on the ground 2 weeks before we went on the Christmas recess break. We had a meeting here with Secretary Hegseth, Secretary Rubio, and they had members of the United States House of Representatives. They gave us a briefing. They lied to us. They said this was not about regime change. And now fast forward, this past weekend we see they've gone and said they've extracted, they've captured, all these other sanitized words for kidnapping and creating a POW in Mr. Maduro's. Now he's in New York City in a jail. What's happening in Venezuela on the ground that we should be concerned about? Will the United States recognize the vice president?
No.
When they say that they are running the government, does that mean President Trump right now is thinking about health care for Venezuelans, food for Venezuelans, returning their oil so they can get some export currency to come back? What exactly, when you talk about running a government, that means he just acquired another state of California. Well, what is he doing for
their orientation? And they are being very explicit, although they lied the week before. They are now telling what the truth that many of us have always knew were the motive force. And that is the largest oil reserve in the world is in Venezuela. Venezuela is one of the founding members of the Organization of Petroleum Countries, OPEC. People don't know that. That whole region from Trinidad has large oil deposits. Guyana has recently discovered large oil deposits. One of the other largest oil reserves in the world is off the coast of Brazil. Those countries are contiguous landmass, including basically Trinidad, which is 12 miles.
Venezuela that has the largest deposit, largest find of oil in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Yemen, Oman, Bahrain, all the other Gulf states, has 50% of its people living in poverty. Why are the people so poor in Venezuela?
Well, the people are poor in Venezuela for two basic reasons. And economic warfare has been going on against Venezuela since the time of Hugo Chavez, whom I also spent a lot of time with. And then Venezuela's own internal issues of corruption and the like. So it's been a combination of forces. But basically an economic strangulation has been going on. What we call an embargo, which the Cubans call a blockade, for example, is economic warfare. That has been the new mode of strangling these countries economically. So several million, almost at least 7 million Venezuelans have left Venezuelans, most in economic flight, as are people from all areas of the South dying in the Mediterranean, trying to get into Europe. This is a global issue of South-South.
Yep, and so I want to put that, also open that up. When you're talking about economic strangulation, so when the average person goes to the grocery store, we can either spend cash or a card. In some places, although less frequent now, you can do a check. If you're running a government and you've been asphyxiated, knocked off, denied access to the international banking system that runs through the United States, meaning the counterparty can no longer exchange cash with you. You have an oil tanker that has 1 million barrels on it that sells for $60 a barrel. That's $60 million. People literally have to have garbage bags full of cash to give you, exchange for you, your cash. But one of the things that Venezuela was doing, and we have the petrodollar, I don't want to go into too much on that, they started doing things around the United States dollar-based currency of exchanging all oil around the world in dollars. They started doing alternative trade. So in many ways,
it's an official black market in addition to the on-the-ground black market. But the Chinese
and so the United States, by trying to strangle them, made them stronger and more creative.
Right. And the Chinese are the other major geopolitical factor. The largest economic relations in the world, and Latin America is the most unequal class society in the world, interesting. The Chinese now are the major economic players.
I'm not going to let you get away with saying that just that quickly. The most unequal class society,
in the
meaning
world.
the region of the world
Yes.
that has the greatest extremity between poverty and wealth.
Right. And natural resources. It's one of the richest natural resources.
So the richest soil has the poorest people.
Right. You've got the Amazon. You've got one of the largest deposits, if not the largest deposits, of pure water in Paraguay.
Silver,
the largest-
lithuanium,
you
fruits,
get
vegetables.
all of the largest producer of
You've
soy.
got the
is
lungs of
Brazil,
the of the world.
of the world
in
there.
Brazil,
Yeah, exactly.
meaning the Amazon,
And in
the
Brazil,
most fresh air.
and where there are over 53% of the population in Brazil self-identifies in the census as negro, black, and raça mixta, mixed race, which they would look like me and you, brown-skinned people. We would not necessarily be prietos or negros pure. That's a democratic question. But when you look at who is the leadership, who's the banking, who's the industry, it is not people who look like. So these are highly racialized societies. Hugo Chavez said to us in 2003 when we met, he says, I'm a mestizo. This is in Venezuela. He says, my background is Indian and Spanish. But my grandmother was una negra. She was a black woman. 3 months later, he's on Democracy Now! At New York and the UN, and my wife and I here in Washington listen to radio, and he says, you see these big lips? You see this big nose? You see this curly hair? That's Mother Africa. He says, I too am an Afro descendant. So people are understanding the racialized nature of this, and this is what our citizens have to do. Who will be the most affected by these kinds of invasions and only dealing with the elites in Latin America? It will be largely black people, single women and mothers, and indigenous communities, of which there are significant indigenous communities in Venezuela. When I listen to the so-called liberal MS news, none of this sociology about the nature is there. It's all that we're bringing democracy to Venezuela. We're going to stabilize Venezuela. And Delcy Rodriguez, who is the vice president, whom I've also spent considerable time with over the years, she is now being targeted. Trump has threatened her. You see what I did to Maduro? If you don't obey me, this is what I will do to you. He said it to Petro, he said it to Scheinberg. He's after Greenland again. And we will see a revitalization of making Canada the 51st Street. We have a megalomaniac in power. We have a legislature that has collapsed.
Who has a particular problem in dealing respectfully and on an equal basis with females and people of color.
And people of color. He comes in his second term, and what does he do? He takes out the top two military people in the U.S. military complex. Who were they? Brown and Austin. Brown and Austin, two black men who worked hard to get those positions. He goes and takes the women out of the universities, some of them from Egyptian American, some of them white American women. It's a highly racialized, misogynist, the orientation.
We're going to get to that in our time for the remaining. Venezuela.
What is to be done?
Okay, well, and so people ask about what's going on with Afghanistan. A lot of people don't necessarily understand where Afghanistan is, and that's a place that's on some distance from here. But Venezuela, we're going to feel.
Yes.
So Chicago, and we're going to feel, and Afghanistan. 60,000 people came into the Chicago area from the Ukrainian area after Mr. Putin took that province.
Right.
And then after we've continued to put economic strangulation on Venezuela, we started sending Venezuelans come up the Panamanian corridor all the way to Mexico, Texas. Greg Abbott shipped and sent 30,000 Venezuelans specifically to Chicago, where they were sleeping outside in the cold. Our city has decency and humanity and gave them shelter. We received 30,000 people. Colombia, the bordering country of Venezuela, received 3 million people.
Yes.
And so now that they're going back in there, and Mr. Rubio says if the vice president does not comply, does not yield to our wishes, we're going to use leverage and make them
bow down
to our will.
Yes.
So what's going to happen now in Venezuela?
What's going to happen now in Venezuela is that if U.S. troops go in there, we're going to see some ground warfare. We're going to see guerrilla warfare. We have to remember that almost 75 years of the FARC and the ELN in Colombia, and Petro, the President Petro was a part of one of those groups. Those borders are contiguous borders. There are several million Colombians in Venezuela and several million Venezuelans in Colombia. Northern Brazil will also be involved. Trinidad is 9-12 miles off the coast with another oil entity. this could be a major conflagration. We in the United States, liberal, conservative, right-wing, tend to think that the migration question is just about who's coming to the United States. But there are pressures on all of these countries, particularly in places like Argentina. We have Africans coming out of Angola and Mozambique who are going into Brazil because they're Spanish, Portuguese speakers. The South is moving north. These are the former colonial exploited areas. What did Trump do? He goes to the UN and he says to the Europeans, your countries and your civilizations are being spoiled. Read by these colored people that you went and colonized, and now they're coming up here. So this could be a major conflagration in the region, a guerrilla warfare, U.S. body bags, and we don't know what actually happened now in Venezuela. We know that a helicopter was hit. Trump said that 2 people were hit. It will not surprise me that in the coming days we're going to find out, one, there were some serious injuries to U.S. soldiers. There may even have been some deaths. These people lie in and out, hour to hour. So what we as United States citizens need to do is, one, to demand that the rule of law be followed. It is Congress, not the executive, who declares war and invasions. We have to get back and hold these congressional people, especially Democrats in South Florida, who are aligning themselves with Republicans against the self-determination and the sovereignty of Venezuelans, of Cubans, and who are going along with these threats. We have to look at the show trial and expose the U.S. media to say, let's look at what is actually going on here. Let's look at the evidence. I know Maduro. Maduro is a Christian. He's a bus driver. He and his wife are always together. You never see him without she goes to work with him every day. Now, that is not to obscure any policy errors or corruption or issues that might be found by way of evidence. But we're dealing with real human beings here who are now being demonized. And he's not a drug trafficker. Yes, his son, their son, was a drug trafficker and was caught and was appropriately punished. So the U.S. audience, we need to be the demos, the ordinary people, with our kasha, the power. That's what democracy is. We need to hold our public servants accountable. You're one of those public servants. You're not just a politician. You come from a family heritage. You come to serve. We should not sit on the sideline and simply observe what is going on between elected officials and this megalomaniac in the White House and the collapse of Congress. We should be supporting and out working with our current people. We have to get in the street. We have to get in the media. We have to demand that democracy be restored and that we follow the rule of law and justice for everybody and get away from this narrowness, America first and only, and that might makes right.
You know, and we're going to have to wrap this up, but when we talk about the questions people have, why did the United States pardon, Mr. Trump pardon Juan Orlando Hernandez, a person that was extradited after he left office, that had an opportunity to defend himself in court, had a level of due process,
Yes.
That was guilty of having shipped and distributed 400 tons of cocaine. I did a back of the math envelope, and that would equal to 7 53-foot tractor trailers. That is end zone to end zone of a football field. And he said he would stuff more cocaine up the gringo's nose. This is Juan Orlando Hernandez. And the only justification for his pardon that Mr. Trump, President Trump, has given is that he was treated the same way by, he believes President Biden treated him badly, just like he was treated badly. And so for all of our prosecutors, all of our investigators, all the people that were in the jury and the judge, he simply dismissed them and gave him no fines, no fees. People that have owed institutions, all the families that have died from those drugs, he's had nothing to say.
And he has nothing to say about what is going on in our society in terms of emotional and mental health, that we are the largest consumers of these drugs. And this is, you know, one time they said, oh, it's just in black people and then brown people. No, we're talking about the Midwest, where fentanyl is devastating white American communities, white rural communities. We're not getting public policy attention from this administration about what is going on in our society that we need to address, that we don't become the market for drug consumption. If we were not consuming so many drugs, they wouldn't be able to sell drugs here.
So, Dr. Early, I'm going to ask you if you would be so kind to come back on, and I'm going to get questions from many of our viewers, and I'd like to continue this conversation because, first of all, you're an educator. You've worked at the Smithsonian Institute, and now that's been under attack. I've got several questions to ask you about that because there's nothing new. History does not repeat itself. People repeat history.
Yes.
We're seeing people now follow the same patterns, and I'd like for you to draw the corollaries, the patterns that we can draw from having understood our history from then to now. We're going through a reemergence. This is, and there's language that I want to further follow up with you, that what does it mean when 2/3 of our hemisphere speak Spanish and Portuguese, black and brown, and we call them backdoor neighbors?
Right.
What does it mean when we say this president has been arrested and he calls himself a prisoner of war? You cannot have your military extract someone, kidnap someone. I mean that these are very charged words. But I want to say thank you for now and Happy New Year. And let's remember those persons from January 6th that came to work and were planning on going home, and they wanted to simply be a part of a transfer of power, and a mob was incited. A vice president was threatened with a hanging. Someone built a gallows. There were chants of kill, hang Mike Pence. And I would like to personally say on this day, looking back at history, thank you, Vice President Pence, for your service. Thank you for your courage. I really didn't have a full appreciation of what responsibilities you had to shoulder that day in working with the most powerful man in the world and telling him no. You had the balance of power. You put country above party. You showed enormous integrity, and thank you for that. On that, I thank you, Dr. Yulee.
I thank you. Until the next time.